Sometimes if you put out the calls, they will come. Research will follow, collaborations will follow. Today, we are going to be treated to 3 sets of presentations. Each of our partner institutions, Illinois, Harvard, and Columbia, they'll be presented in that order, all already have a history of collaborative research in different areas, and we are very proud to highlight that here today. The first set of presenters will be from the University of Illinois. They are Joe Love and Werner Baer. I believe they're going in that order. And it's almost embarrassing for me to introduce the people that are known to all of you here, the most preeminent historian and economist, one could arguably say, of Brazil in the United States for a long, long time. They have a history of collaborating with Brazil, and they'll be talking about that. The next set of presenters will be from Harvard. We will start with Jason Dyett, who is known to, I think, everybody in this room, is the person who makes Harvard in Brazil work. And he will talk a little bit about the origins of some of our collaborations. We will then have Professor Marcia Castro, who pioneered our collaborations in public health. And we will also have Professor Chad Vecitis, who is an important anchor of our collaborative efforts in engineering with Brazil. And our third set of presenters will be from Columbia. We will have Dean Wigley will be joining us, as I understand it, in a few minutes. We've given him dispensation as a dean. We're grateful for his attendance. And we will also have Pedro Rivera. And our commentators today will be Jason Lane, who is a senior researcher from the Rockefeller Institute, and he is on the education faculty at the State University of New York of SUNY Albany. And we will be joined momentarily by Paulo Blickstein, who is in the education department at Stanford University. And so without cutting into my presenter's time any longer, I would like to turn the field over now to Joe and to Joe.
Thank you, Fran. I'm afraid this is going to be an exercise in bragging rights, but we do think we have a successful program in economics at the University of Illinois, and that's not the only thing we do, but that's the thing I'd like to talk about today, the cooperation between Brazilian universities and the University of Illinois in the field of economics and related social sciences. Development of the Lemann Institute at the University of Illinois, which was established in 2009, grew out of a long-term relationship between 2 people, Werner Baer and Jorge Paulo Lemann, who knew each other at Harvard in the late 1950s. Over a subsequent period, beginning in the late 1990s, Jorge Paulo made a number of grants and gifts to the University of Illinois. I don't know whether this is universal, but we call it grant something that is self-exhausting, whereas a gift is an endowment. These funds included an endowment for Brazilian graduate students of economics at the University of Illinois, and the funding of the chair in economics currently occupied by Werner Baer. In 2006, J.P. Lemann and the Chancellor of the University of Illinois jointly funded an exchange program for Brazilian and Illinois professors and graduate students in economics. The related fields included economic geography, that is to say regional science, and to a lesser extent economic history. This program was a continuation of a previous program funded by the Hewlett Foundation for the training and aperfeiçoamento of the profession of economics in Brazil by exchanging professors from that country and the University of Illinois and graduate students on a one-by-one basis. An equal number of Illinois professors and graduate students went to Brazil as those who came here, and the idea was short-term exchanges. Some of the exchanges went up to a month, went up to a semester or even a year, but most of them were initially for a single month. This was sponsored by the Hewlett Foundation, co-directed by Werner Bayer and me. I was at the time the director of our Center for Latin American Studies. And the two of us have been collaborating in various ways on research projects since 1994. And in 2000, we published a collaborative book called Liberalization and Its Consequences, Comparative Perspective on Latin America and Eastern Europe. Well, anyway, in the beginning of 2000, this program went into effect, focusing on short-term research fellowships, just for research, with the obligation of each participant giving a single seminar over the course of that period. And this was one of 3 Hewlett Foundation grants for international cooperation between American universities and Latin American universities. And it was the only one of the 3 to be renewed in the year 2004. It continued for a total of 9 years to December 2008. And at that point, University of Illinois and Lemann picked up the program, so there was a seamless transition, a continuous collaboration between our university and some of those in Latin America, or Brazil in particular. The first collaborative institutions were the USP, Department of Economics, and that of the PUC in Rio, Pontificia Universidade Católica, and it soon expanded to include universities from Rio Grande do Sul to Ceará. Although the central focus remained on economics, other disciplines were added, notably political science. The Lemann, Illinois exchange, which was negotiated in 2008, was introduced seamlessly as a continuation of the Hewlett program, so we've been in this business for now 11 years. There has been continuous publication as well growing out of this collaboration. Some of individual articles published in joint projects, some of them collaborative articles between Brazilian professors and Illinois professors. The program was structured to hold conferences and workshops alternating between our campus and those in Brazil. PUC Rio, University of Brasilia, the Federal University of Pernambuco, and USP, twice for USP, have hosted conferences between our university and Brazilian institutions. Over the years, the Brazilian anchor of the program has been the Faculdade de Economia e Administração of USP, FEA USP, which has, as you all know, a top-flight economics program with a large faculty and graduate enrollment. USP has devoted considerable financial resources itself to this collaboration, but participants also have included PUC Rio, the University of Pernambuco, the University of Minas Gerais, Rio Grande do Sul, Bahia, Ceará, Rio de Janeiro, plus Unicamp, and USP ESAC at the State University of Piracicaba, and several other universities around the country. So it grew from a core program at the University of Sao Paulo and to virtually include almost the whole country. Representatives as well of the economics department of foreign universities participated, notably the University of Manchester, which also hosted a meeting with us and the University of Sao Paulo at Paraty in 2005. Illinois is a center of Brazilian studies. Soon came to the attention of awards committees at CNPq, FAPESP, and CAPES, so that over the last decade, we have attracted a number of PhD candidates from Brazilian institutions. And not only that, but Brazilians who received bolsas sanduíches. This has come up before yesterday. The sandwich grants, whereby people having finished all the PhD requirements except the dissertation will spend 6 months or a year abroad. And we've had great success with this at the University of Illinois, I think partly because, unlike some universities in the United States, we don't require that the participants pay tuition. They just need the consent of their American orientador. In 2009, J.P. Lemann vastly expanded the Brazilian enterprise at Illinois by endowing an Institute of Brazilian Studies. This is a multidisciplinary institute with a new chair in history and other positions at the University of Illinois to strengthen our Brazil program. The special provision was included to include mid-career economists, specifically in the gift agreement now being negotiated with the Banco Central in Brazil. These civil servants will take a master's degree in science policy economics. I will move on to say that J.P. Lemann, the donor, gave additional money for the holding the Congress of the Brazilian Studies Association next year at the University of Illinois, and for hosting the Secretariat of the BRASA, Brazilian Studies Association at Illinois, for a 5-year period. Let me just close by saying, in assessing the effects of this endeavor, we should not only take into account the physical products, but the networks that have been produced, and networks are, as we know, institutions. Professors and graduate students from Illinois and from Brazilian universities have participated in a very extensive and lasting way. I mean, one example is the former dean of the School of Economics and Business at the University of Sao Paulo, Carlos Azzoni, who has participated from the beginning to the present in our conferences. So we consider the training of Brazilians in various disciplines not only the beginning of a professional leadership, a professional career, but one that will continue over time. And currently, the president of the Banco Central, Alexandre Tombini, holds a PhD from U of I, and we hope that he will supply people from the central bank who will attend the University of Illinois in the future. So that's where we are at the University of Illinois, and I think it's important to note that since 1975, we have trained about 90 economists at the PhD level. So we think in quantitative terms as well as qualitative terms, we can qualify as a success story of international exchange. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a few complimentary remarks. The conference we've held have had various themes. Joe mentioned one of them, liberalism and its consequences, comparing Latin America, but especially Brazil, with Eastern Europe. But since then, we've chosen a number of other themes. For example, we had one on energy, comparing the energy situation in Brazil versus the United States. We had another one on regional problems, the regional impact of macroeconomic policies. This was held in Recife with the Federal University of Pernambuco. Probably in the near future, we're going to have a conference dealing with infrastructure problems. In addition to this, let me emphasize one more thing. What we felt is that for a while we went through, and many of us in the States went through the stage of training Brazilians, giving them a graduate training, giving them, conferring on them a master's, especially PhD. But we went beyond this. The important thing is we felt that giving a PhD is just the beginning of a relationship that should mature. And the ideal is to have our former students working with us as colleagues, developing programs as colleagues, producing papers jointly. And I think that's an important philosophy, that we go beyond the stage of just aid, from the developed to the underdeveloped, but right now to form a relationship, a professional relationship that hopefully will last for a long time.
we didn't choose all of these themes either. I mean, it's in collaboration with Brazilian colleagues.
Oh, okay, thank you. I didn't realize your division of labor, okay. I thank you for staying well within your time in that case. And I just want to say that this collaboration really is the one that's so long-standing, and it set the standard for the rest of us to look up to. It's a remarkable story that has gone on for decades, and it's something that we all admire very much. So now the stage is set for a little school in Cambridge. Jason.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank our co-hosts and organizers who bore the brunt of the heavy lifting. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the opportunity. I have 5 minutes to talk primarily about the how of collaborations. I think that Professors Marcia Castro and Chad Vecitis, who are the faculty and the office that Harvard established in the Brazil program a little over 5 years ago, works with faculty members across all of the different schools of the university to try to deepen the relationship between Harvard and Brazil. So I am a jack of all trades, master of none, and I will not try to speak to the content of the specific area. Our focus is on how do you build collaborations. I think we have a tremendous amount to learn, but this may be at a more micro level than what the discussion was this morning, but just things that I think that these collaborative courses, which we'll talk about, address, or that we very much hope they address and have seen over the last 5 years. Carlos Brito mentioned that high school is a things need to start earlier. High school is a key problem. So addressing challenges earlier. Jorge Guimarães talked about numbers being low. How do you increase the numbers? We're starting a new program, so we're very much trying to build those numbers. Marcia Lima talked about equality of opportunity. So how do we try to build equality of opportunity through these collaborative courses? There was a whole host of people, Eduardo Viotti, Claudio Moura Castro, who's not here, Jorge Balan, and Lucia Mello, who talked about strong doctorate programs in Brazil, a lot of very great materia prima. How do we take advantage of that to have horizontal collaborations, to have things that aren't starting in one side or the other, but that really take advantage of both? So with that, these are photos of the collaborations. I think that integration is a critical piece of these collaborative courses. So we're very focused on having a one-to-one ratio of students. These courses have taken place in Brazil. We have half of the students from the different places of Harvard. We're not, in our program, we're very open. So if we can have students from the Graduate School of Design, together with students from engineering, together with undergraduates, we will. But it's incredibly important to have that ratio of one-to-one. The dynamic of people talking to each other when it's a one-to-one relationship is totally different. So as you can see on the lower right slide, half of the students are from Harvard, half are from Brazil. In almost everything we do, we put a great emphasis on who the people are. So biographies, photos in advance. We would never let 7 Brazilians sit together. We would always stagger them one-to-one, forced integration in hotel rooms, at meals, in buses, because so much of the collaboration can be built out of side conversations. And I think that this is true at all levels, from first-year undergraduates through doctoral students through the most senior faculty. What we have seen is that those connections are incredibly important. So the how that is done is important. These are field-based courses. So the question that we faced at the beginning is, why would I get on a plane and travel to Brazil? Why Brazil? And if we cannot answer that question, it's a very, it's labor-intensive, it's resource-intensive, so we better be able to have a very good answer to that. It's also more interesting, I think, for students and faculty to listen to the theory and then instantly go see it. So there will be some examples of that both on the engineering side, public health, infectious diseases. They tend to be areas that lend themselves very well to field work. I touched already a little bit on multidisciplinary nature of them, reaching out and pulling people in. The names of courses have changed slightly. The core of having engineering students has been constant, but 1 year depending on the faculty who are participating. Energy and the environment would be 1 year, engineering and urban planning the next year. So really adapting to make sure we take advantage of the faculty. The objective is building lasting long-term research and teaching collaborations throughout Brazil. We have done these geographically in Sao Paulo, in the interior of Bahia, in Rio de Janeiro, and at Itaipu. So they're very diverse. This is a quick look. I won't go into much detail because I don't have much time, but I think the point about time is these take time to develop. And it's different from what we do on campus at Harvard, where faculty can walk across the Harvard Yard. We're 5 years in, and we're just getting started. We're just getting a sense of what the impact of this can be. So we have had public symposia that bring faculty down to Brazil. We'll identify 2 or 3 people that seem to have vai da samba, the people have similar interests, and we'll try to put them together and pull them in. So we have a broad range of faculty who are Brazilians, who know the networks and know the people better than we do, to faculty who have never been to Brazil before, and we try to make it so that we can work with everybody. So this is just a look at the timelines for the public health course, which we've had 4 editions of, and the engineering course, which is entering its 3rd. So with that, let me hand it over to Marcia Castro.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been able to build so far through this collaborative course in public health. So 2 things here. First one, if you think the numbers are too shy, please keep in mind that we only run this course 4 times. So what I'm going to show is just a little bit of what we expect to be a much more fruitful and successful collaboration in the coming years. I speak loud. Sorry. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I divided in 3 parts. The first one, I'm going to show some results regarding collaborations with faculty. And I should say that there are many more collaborations happening, so I'm only talking about the ones that came because of this public health course. So the first one is there is a whole project happening now looking at asymptomatic malaria in the Brazilian Amazon, and this collaboration started about 13 months ago. I'm the one being involved with that, and I'm working with folks at the parasitology department at University of São Paulo. So this is completely new and only happened because of connections that were made through the course. The second one is there are 2 faculty that teach the course, 2 faculty from Brazil, one from the medical school at USP, the other one at Santa Casa, also the medical school. And the 3 of us have been working really close in the past 3 years or so. And a few things that are starting to happen. The first one is this summer here in Brazil, winter there, I'm going to receive 1 student from Santa Casa who is going to do an internship. So basically working in a project of mine through one of those scholarships that the Brazilian government is giving out to the students. This is totally informal. I mean, it's nothing formal through Harvard. The second one is this past summer, this past July, I was with those 2 faculty plus another faculty from the US visiting a site in Pará that's in the Brazilian Amazon. And what we're doing now is doing a very detailed planning to run the public health course in 2013 in Pará. And they have a terrific program on delivering healthcare to riverine communities in the Amazon. So this is going to be the first time that anybody will try to analyze, evaluate, and try to build up how you can scale up this kind of program in the Amazon. Second thing, we've been running symposiums at Harvard and inviting the faculty, the Brazilian faculty that were associated with the course. So in 2008, we brought 1 faculty. 2010, we brought 2 faculty. And next spring, we're going to organize another one, and we have budget to bring 2 faculty involved in the course. Last year, Santa Casa ran a workshop and invited 1 of the faculty, well, that was me, to talk. And this was all done by video conference, so I didn't have to travel. But again, something that came out through the course. Another thing is one of the students that participated in the course this past January was writing a master's thesis combining remote sensing, malaria. This is the kind of stuff that I do. And then we found some budget and I came and I was in the committee for her defense. This was in the National Institute of Spatial Research in the interior of São Paulo. The other thing, probably most important, is that we've just published one paper in PLOS, Neglected Tropical Diseases, highlighting the format of the course, the achievements of the course, and how the course has been playing an important role in highlight the importance of 4 neglected diseases. So the course targets 5, 4 of them are neglected diseases. So this is out there describing the whole philosophy and format that we use in the course. Now, regarding Harvard students, again, this is just things that have been happening so far. We expect those numbers to become much, much bigger as the years come by. But we have several students, both at the 2-year masters, Masters of Public Health and doctoral dev, that have been writing their thesis and final papers and dissertations on topics related on what they've done in the course. So that's really big. One doctoral dissertation has been defended. The other one is about to. Both of those 2 doctoral students went back to Brazil and spent at least 6 months doing field work. And they were advised by Brazilian faculty as well. So Brazilian faculty were in the committee. We had a few master students that also returned to Brazil to do field work, again supervised by faculty in Brazil. 2 of the Harvard students are now working in Brazil with public health. 3 of them end up being TAs for the course, teaching assistants. And what I think it's really important is that at least 3 of them started to learn Portuguese pretty serious, which I think it's extremely important if they wanted to go back. For the first time this past January, 2011, we had 3 undergrads that registered for the course. We didn't have them before. They did an outstanding job. One went to medical school, spent this past June, July in Brazil, in Rio, working in the slum, and is planning to go back to do research in Brazil. And finally, regarding Brazilian students, one student that participated in the first edition of the course registered at Harvard to do the MPH. She was successfully accepted. She received a fellowship from the Lemann Center, and now she's back in Brazil working in the Ministry of Health. That's a huge achievement. Also, one student from the course this year just wrote a paper with 2 of the Harvard students about the idea of doing collaborative research in an academic environment, and this was also recently published in One Health newsletter. The name in bold is the Brazilian one. She's the first author. The other 2 are Harvard students. We had 2 Brazilians that also work at STAs for the course, teaching assistants. And lastly, we had 1 student that participated in the 2nd edition of the course that secured a 1-year-long internship at NIH. He's just finishing and he's applying to a PhD, I think, in University of Florida. So I'll pass the torch to Chad. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for telling us how the Harvard School of Public Health course has led to collaborations, and I will explain to you how the engineering course has led to collaborations between US and Brazil. And first, I must thank Dr. Klaas for setting up this collaborative course, because it really was the catalyst for this collaboration. It wouldn't have happened without it. I've only been at Harvard for a little over a year, and I got a wonderful opportunity last January to travel with this course to Sao Paulo, where I spent 2 weeks looking around and seeing their fantastic infrastructure. And I'm a professor of environmental engineering within the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And as a water engineer, and in particular as a water engineer, as a water engineer, in particular for municipal scale water engineering, the U.S. is not a very interesting place to be. We have all of our infrastructure in place, and it was designed to last for 40 or 50 years. And for someone who investigates novel water treatment technologies, there's not many places to implement them. So it was a great opportunity to go and visit Sao Paulo, where you have such a dynamic urban environment that's growing very quickly. And it's grown so much that they've actually pushed their water supply already to the limit. And on top of that, they have issues in the fact that they grew so fast that their water infrastructure could not keep up. In particular, their wastewater treatment. And this has led to the use of what should be two beautiful rivers around the city, the Pinheiros and the Dyett, as their wastewater treatment. As you can see in this picture right in the middle here. And this has even led to even further stress on their water supply, since these actually lead into one of the reservoirs, the Guaraparanga. And so they no longer can use this water supply for drinking water. And so this is where the collaboration started, and I can proudly say that I've been collaborating with Poly-USP for my whole faculty career at Harvard. Professor Mierzwa, the fine gentleman pictured up in the upper right-hand corner, came and actually visited Harvard before I even started, where we first discussed our plans for this collaboration. He's actually been at Harvard for about the past 9 months, where we have been examining novel membranes, membranes being filtration devices for water treatment, for drinking water treatment. And in those short 9 months, we've already made some great discoveries. We've been able to increase the rate of flow of water through the membranes while also reducing the cost of the treatment. And so this collaboration, in a number of ways, is very synergistic. The first of these ways is that at Harvard, I am referred to as an environmental engineer, although I've been trained classically as a chemist. So I'm very much an applied scientist. And we do things at very small scales. We're talking maybe a few liters a day. Whereas when you look at places, even Boston, you need 1 billion liters a day. In Sao Paulo, you need 10 to 20 billion liters a day, right? And so the nice thing about this collaboration is we can do some of the research at the fundamental level at Harvard, and then the labs at Sao Paulo, at Poly-USP, they can take it the next level or two up, where if we do a few liters, they can take the technology and advance it such that you're doing tens to hundreds to thousands of liters a day. And this is very important for water treatment, because obviously a few liters a day doesn't mean much. And so there's plans to continue this collaboration. And so in the upper right-hand corner, we have Victor Arrieta, who is an undergraduate student from Poly-USP in chemical engineering, who's been in the lab for about the past 3 months, helping out with the project. And he's been fantastic. I've actually been extremely impressed by his skill level in the laboratory. Much better than most of the Harvard students. And so this has resulted in, hopefully, a long-term relationship between Harvard School of Engineering Applied Sciences and the University of Sao Paulo Polytechnico. And so I think I'll finish up there.
I was just going to close with one piece, which is what we have planned for the future. As I said, this is very much a work in progress. And a few things that we've learned about the collaborative nature of the course. This year will be the 3rd edition of the engineering course. It will actually take place at Harvard, in Cambridge and Boston, and then in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and in New Orleans with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So the partnerships with private sector, we did things with Odebrecht in Brazil and with others. So students will go out and go into the field. And I think that this is an important tool for pushing the internationalization of the university. It's not just externally. It's tough to penetrate universities. We face the challenge to internationalize Harvard as well. So one step is we will be internationalizing in January by bringing students up from Brazil, 10 students from Polytechnica, 10 students from Harvard, and that will be a step. We're also working on a mentoring and language acquisition program, which is a separate program, but it's taking Harvard College students and matching them up with Brazilian students who are 16 years old coming out of public schools, getting grants either through Education USA, eSmart, Instituto Gereçat. So finding the students who have worked incredibly hard from the public system that have gotten some type of support, and that then will be matched up with the same model of one-to-one. So each time we try and steal from a course, we figure something out. The models are somewhat different, but this I find very exciting because
all of our courses now and all of our programs have a clear answer to why is this interesting for Brazil and why is this interesting for Harvard. So that's the model that we're following.
Next up is our team from Columbia. And I'm told that the dean is arriving. And so we'll give the dean a moment to settle. What's your division of labor? Are you going to go first? Sure. Okay. Dean Wigley, thank you very much for making it here. We're welcome to our dialogue, and we will now hear about Columbia's Studio X in Rio de Janeiro, cooperation and innovation in solving urban problems.
This is the Studio X in Rio de Janeiro, which the director of this space, Pedro Rivera, will explain the details of how that space works. Maybe I should try to explain why the School of Architecture has such a space anywhere in the world, and then maybe a little bit why I wanted to be in Brazil and why Rio instead of Sao Paulo, for example. But basically, you know, we are the School of Architecture. We were founded in 1881, which I think is the same year of Coca-Cola. And the answer to the question might be similar to the answer that they would offer, but hopefully the nature of the relationship is entirely the opposite. As an architect, I represent the union of architects that has been for thousands of years looking for dignity in society. And so we have always felt that we belonged in the highest levels of society. And so the very first treatises of architecture suggest that the architect is an intellectual and is a means for giving politicians permanent power through memory. But the politicians didn't consider those arguments to be very significant. Then when the universities were formed, 11th, 12th century, we made another move, but they said, no, you make buildings, even if you have interesting ideas about buildings, you really want to make buildings, so you represent the opposite of university. We are withdrawn from the world, and you could not be more in the world. Then in the 15th century, we thought we had it really figured out. We said, we don't make buildings, we make drawings of buildings. And the drawings have the idea, and someone else makes the building. And the university said, that's an excellent move, but not good enough. So we became part of the academies that eventually became Royal Academies and so on. So and the idea of architecture inside the university is a uniquely American idea. It comes because the United States was nervous about the German research university, and an argument was made when America started the land-grant colleges that architecture could be part of that. The reason I say all of this is we as architects are very proud to be in the university, but we are something like an immigrant that has arrived somewhat late. I've always been interested in what it means for us to be in the university. I've never thought of the other way around. Why did the university think it was a good idea? And my argument would be that in 1881, America was 29% urbanized. And you would say that doesn't sound like very much, but it had been 15% urbanized 40 years earlier and would be 50% urbanized by 1920. In other words, we were launched as a school exactly in the middle of rapid urbanization. So one of the major research universities of the world was saying, we need to be intelligent about cities because cities are part of our mandate for reducing the level of stupidity, let's say, in the world. Of course, the question of cities for us started with buildings, architects, then neighborhoods, urban design, then cities themselves, planning, then the development of cities, real estate development, then the memory of cities, historic preservation. So we have continued to expand what constitutes the different kinds of skills needed to think about the city. And of course, since we are here in New York, we are on the one hand an American university, and on the other hand, New York is simply not America. New Jersey is as close as America ever came to New York. And you can see America on a beautiful day. So of course, this is the quintessential immigrant city in which our students come from 55 different countries every year, including Brazil. And they do magnificent, dense experimentation. And probably unlike any other school at Columbia University, every single student travels to some part of the world with their teacher to do work. So this is a school that has as its mandate to be the most experimental and the most global and also the number one in research. We have the reference library of the field. Now, if I say all these things, you could not hear this as arrogant, and I think indeed it is arrogant. I think it's foolish to imagine that even if one would have the best young minds of the world in the most experimental environment, thinking about every dimension of the city, we are no longer in a moment of the global history in which any one place can claim to have created a concentration of expertise, no matter how biodiverse that concentration is. And surely to think about the future of cities in New York is fundamentally different than to think about it in Mumbai, Rio, South Africa, and so on. So I have the feeling that the traditional model of the research university needs to evolve. Secondly, if America's population was 50% urbanized in 1920, the world's population was urbanized at 50% 2 years ago. And we're headed towards something like 70% of the world's 7 billion people living in cities. Now, this is an entirely untested theory. We have really no evidence that would suggest that what you think of as a city can survive 70% of 7 billion people. We know more about what it would mean to live on Mars than we do about what it would mean to live on Earth. On Mars, you pretty much know there's no oxygen. And you know that if we were to settle there, we would combine not just all the resources of a university, but every university and also every technical division to think it through. But the truth is we are moving towards the city of the future more rapidly than we are moving towards Mars, and we know less about that city. Now, that's the second point. The third point would be universities are not evolving as quickly as cities. And if that's the case, then the university's ability to think thoughtfully and responsibly about the city is actually going down with time. So I believe that there will be a transformation of the research university that will enable it, number one, to engage with the global condition in which we are all now participating. And secondly, I increasingly believe that the number one issue for every university everywhere will be the city. It's no longer a subject that can be housed in an architecture school. It is also international public affairs, it's also business, it's journalism, it's public health, it's ethics, it's philosophy, technology, engineering. I think it would be hard to demonstrate, hard for a university to argue. Let's say in 5 years, it will be very hard for a university to argue that there's any more important question than the city, which is to say, there is no more important question than what will it mean for us to live together in the future. A city is a machine for living with people that would have been a long way away from you. So the idea of the Studio X is to do the opposite of the school. The school is a hyper-concentrated nuclear reactor, fantastic students, fantastic teachers producing extraordinary work. It's a laboratory school. So in theory, I should be happy. But in reality, I feel that the real laboratories are no longer in the university. All of what used to be Russia has become an enormous laboratory for the future of cities. China, more than 50% of the world's new buildings are being built in China every year. China is the norm. We are all the exception. Southeast Asia, Africa, South Pacific, and so on. These are the real laboratories for the future of the city. So the idea of Studio X is to take the most precious asset of a school of architecture, which is the design studios, which are spaces for open, collaborative research on problems that are not yet defined. And what the students actually do is develop an understanding of what the problem is, not what the solution would be. These are normally very fragile spaces hidden underneath the roof of architecture schools. They're very messy, very smelly, very crazy. They're like the bedroom of a teenager. We never show these spaces to the world. We show to the world lecture rooms and exhibition halls and libraries which are quiet, clean, and confident. Studio X is a space of doubt and debate and discussion. And the idea of Studio X is to take these very fragile spaces and actually place them in key cities around the world that are at the center of development, have a local curator of these spaces. So this is Studio X. The most important thing is the coffee. It has to have extraordinarily, the great secret to architectural education is extremely good coffee and extremely bad alcohol. Both stimulate thought. You need a lot of coffee during the day, and in the evening, if the alcohol is bad, you will really talk to whoever you're with about life. But if the alcohol is really excellent, you just live. You don't talk about life. So during the day, and you can see they have all the facilities of libraries and so on. During the day, there are places of research in which people who are doing anything about the future of cities can operate. They don't have to be from Columbia. They can be from anywhere in the world. They can be from any field. Simply the desire to do work on the question of the future of cities is welcome. The job of the director is just to say yes to every request. Yes. In the evening, there are spaces of debate and discussion. So we started in New York, then Beijing, Amman, Bombay, Rio, Moscow, very likely Istanbul, and Johannesburg. That forms some kind of network. Of course, what really matters is the interconnections of the network. This is some kind of brain. This is the opposite of Starbucks. This is not selling some kind of expertise. It's exactly the opposite. The assumption is that the new ideas will be generated in these places, not back here in New York. New York is absolutely not a city of the future. It is a model of cosmopolitan life, but it's an old model. It's a model of an aspiration, but that aspiration would be satisfied by very different operations. Brazil will play more of a role in thinking the future of cities than will New York, for many reasons. In my opinion. But even then, it is the sort of flower, it's just the sort of unpredictable activity that will happen that is the main goal. So this is what a Studio X looks like. This is 300 people that turned up to talk about food in New York. We have never advertised what we do. I don't know how they find the space. They come. They make exhibitions. The primary audience is young people between the ages of graduation and vegetation. So let's say somewhere between 25 and 45. They have the phenomenal. I mean, I think the next generation is really very, very spectacular. But then society asked them to be very good at one thing. When they were at school, they were thinking of the whole picture. So in the evening, they would like to go to a place and listen and learn. So they go here. You see, there's a lot of listening going on. Always listening, but in large groups, basically every night. So in New York, almost every night, 150 people come, and you just keep talking. And because the young people are there, the not so young are also there, and also they are not coming from architecture. These people are, I don't know where they are from. But for example, on the top, this is teams of planners and developers and social activists working on public housing projects. Some of the work that's produced goes into the world. So this is installations in museums and in Korea. That was the prototype. Then we are in Beijing. This is a Japanese factory building. It's very big, open space. Studio X means studio, empty room. X means we have no idea what happens there. But I'm going to go fast. So we're still in China. Now we're in Jordan, in Amman, where we are part of the Columbia's Global Centers. It's very important to note, in many of these cities we are part of and a kind of diversification of the Global Centers model that I'm sure Tom has told you a little bit about. So here we are in Lemann, and we will soon be in this house in the bottom, which we are preserving right in the middle of this neighborhood. We like usually to be between the artists and the drug addicts. We are usually in a historic part of the city that is about to become central to the city's life. So both the artists actually and the drug addicts will go. So you could say we are part of the problem. So here we are working on this house, which is the first Prime Minister's house in Jordan. We do this as an act of love because we are so proud to be in these cities. Here we are in Mumbai. You will see the spaces are always the same. They're just big empty spaces in which anything can happen. And 90% of the activities in the space is directed by the local curator who has only the interests of their own city and their own community in mind. We are the guests in this conversation. Again, Mumbai. And then to the space in Rio, which Pedro is going to describe. And I just want to compliment Pedro. If you needed a real explanation of why it is that, well, Brazil, of course, has emerged as the very clear leader of one cannot say Latin America, South America. One shouldn't even say South America. South to what? Perhaps the United States should be called north of there. Surely Brazil has taken on this role of galvanizing the ambitions and abilities of the whole region. So even if I reject a kind of Cold War regional model, nevertheless, Brazil is a leader of the region in the same way that China is, in the same way that Russia is, and so on. We are always in those places. And in those places, you find unbelievably beautiful people who will help us to think about cities in a completely new way. And in this way, will educate Colombia. So my basic model here is that this is a way of upgrading and intensifying the abilities and responsibilities of the school here. It is exactly the opposite of the Starbucks model. Who in their right mind would drink Starbucks in Rio? And so, I mean, in this particular moment, the coffee machine is absolutely the best in this space. This is the best machine we have. And the director is Pedro Rivera, who's a fantastic architect, who is really the person to whom all the quality of this space should be given. And Pedro is going to explain how it works.
Well, I'm the guy between graduation and vegetation. So, well, first I would like to thank Thomas for inviting me to be here, Mark Wigley for inviting me to join this exciting adventure, and also to thank the City of Rio, the Mayor, and Washington Fajardo also, the Secretary of Heritage, to believe in this adventure and to put their efforts in helping us in establishing the city. By now, Tom just received an email. We are very proud to say that we just found a new sponsor in the city. ABX is going to support Studio X Rio and Global Center, the both institutions. We just had the news 15 or a half hour ago. So thank you. Well, I'd like to introduce a little bit about myself. I was born and grown in Rio, and I studied architecture and urban design in Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro from 92 and 97. And after graduate, I started to work as an architect on an office on my own with colleagues. In 2004, I started to teach architecture and urban design as a professor, first in Estácio de Sá, which is one of those private institutions, and then at PUC-Rio, which is one of those non-for-profit institutions. My engagement with GSAP, the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation of Columbia, begins in 2009 after an invitation from a school professor to do a lecture at Studio X New York. This happened some months before the dean visited Brazil to prospect the possibility of bringing Studio X to the country. When I was asked to help on this task, I immediately realized that Studio X represented an immense opportunity to energize the field of architecture and its related disciplines in Rio. And also to engage the communities of professionals, students, and academics into a more global perspective. We're talking here about how Brazil is involved in, and one of the big issues of these transformations of the country is becoming more global. Brazil was pretty much isolated. When I was at school from 92, from 97, Brazil was still pretty much isolated. Well, the expertise of Columbia, the global connections offered by Studio X Network, and the set of activities it proposed, Mark just showed you, workshops, exhibitions, lectures, etc., were amazing conditions to promote a creative and critical environment to debate and speculate on the future of the cities. And as a Carioca, I did put all my efforts to help to make this happen. And for my satisfaction, the dean found an enthusiastic feedback in the city. And Studio X concept was immediately welcomed, achieving a decisive support by the City Hall and the local communities of architects, artists, etc. Some months later, after the selection to host the Olympic Games, Columbia gave the green light to start our place in Rio. And we in Rio, we are a non-for-profit association, a Columbia University non-for-profit association, our legal status. So this is when this happens. And in all I told you this, the dean decided that there should be someone local to run the place. I was very, very happy to accept this. And that's, well, this is how I started to work with the school. Well, some of you, most of you already talk a little bit about that. Well, in the last 10 years, Brazil is experiencing a significant development. Decades of crisis and stagnation were substituted by economic vitality, impacting Brazilian society in multiple dimensions. Historic loans, foreign loans were paid, unemployment rates are doing well, many people left poverty, and a new middle class has arisen. Brazil became the flavor of the month. In this context, the case of Rio is especially emblematic. Since the transfer of the political power to Brazil in the early 60s, the city suffered a systematic process of decadence. Recent opportunities brought by pre-salt offshore discoveries, preparations for the Olympic Games, and the success of recent public safety policies did put the city back on the tracks, the city and the state back on the track. I want to just to mention something. This last week, Rocinha, which is the most emblematic favela in the city, was released from decades of drug dealing control. And by now, an area the size of Manhattan is free from armed control from drug dealers. I mean, including both the formal and the formal areas together. This is very important for the city, for the transformation of the city. And the recent developments is an important shift in the perception we Brazilians have about our own country. Lula said at some point, 2 minutes? Okay, let's run. So from the lack of hope, we shifted to a new mood. We feel like, yes, we can. And this creates a fertile ground for new kinds of organizations to promote new strategies for thinking and engaging people on the transformation of the country and its cities. The US are also experiencing a new and positive moment for international relations, reevaluating its policies regarding other cultures and countries, seeking to establish a new and more balanced channels for dialogue and negotiation. Studio X cannot be defined as a traditional academic institution, neither a branch of Columbia University dedicated to export education. Rather than that, Studio X is a platform for collaboration and exchange between different communities, both at local and global scales. So this is where we are. Since March, we are installed in the 13 feet or 4 meters large building offered by the City Hall in the downtown area. This space is an amazing renovated 3-floor sobrado. Sobrado is our typology, the similar for tenement house in New York. It's in the square, as Mark mentioned, it's between the junkies and the prostitutes. We like to be there. Well, GCEP has a long experience working in Brazil, but since the decision to install Studio X in Rio, the bridge started to become more and more important. The school studios play a significant role in the network by creating a consistent flow of students and faculty that travels and exchanges knowledge in the country. In the last year, 5 different studios, architectural design, real estate, preservation, urban planning, developed ideas and research about Rio. Other 8 studios are already expected until March next year to come to the city, adding urban design and the GCEP's curatorial program in architecture to the list. Collaborations include joint presentations and working sessions between students and faculty from Columbia University and local academics, artists, professional institutions, etc., as well as exhibitions and other activities that help to activate Studio X. People from Rio and Brazil also travel to New York, feeding back the exchange. An equivalent set of activities at Studio X are not directly in the school grid. Sometimes they are developed by our own team. Sometimes are people who propose ideas for us. It's major that communities perceive Studio X as an open space where they can actively and lively participate. We are interested on everyone who engages or is affected in some dimensions by the urban life. To accomplish the mission of exploring the future of the cities, Studio X acts as a hub where professionals, academics, locals, decision makers, students, institutions, artists, entrepreneurs, communities, etc., find a neutral space to discuss and collaborate. Every activity at Studio X is free and open to public. And the more diverse the people and institutions we collaborate, more productive and challenging are the conversations. Studio X, as the rest of the network, has not a defined mode of operation, but is dedicated to explore new possibilities and formats that create ground for new ideas to spark, from the very complex to the very simple. We want to test how research and design can unfold into different sets of activities through collaborative processes. Rather than presenting final results, we are interested in the processes and how cross-cultural, cross-disciplinary, and cross-continental exchanges can affect and contribute to each other. Running risks is part of the experimentation, and we accept them as part of the process. By being active in the neighborhood, we work to contribute as much as possible to the revitalization of Praça Tiradentes, acting both as a forum to discuss its future and by realizing events in the building and in the square as an activator of the public space. By operating at multiple scales, Praça Tiradentes, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Latin America, and the rest of the globe, we engage on horizontal questions that affect cities worldwide, identifying challenges and solutions to which we can collaborate or benefit from. Activities may range from the most targeted topics that affect cities to the most unexpected explorations. To conclude, I would like to mention two important historical events in Brazil. In 1922, at the São Paulo Modern Art Week, writer Oswald de Andrade and others launched the Anthropophagic Manifest. They were not interested in the Eurocentric culture of the time, but in developing an independent Brazilian culture. The name anthropophagic was borrowed from a historic fact when cannibals ate a bishop in Brazil. Cannibals believed that by eating and digesting their opponents, they would acquire their best skills. Oswald and the others related that fact to their vision. They defended a more balanced relation between Brazil and foreign cultures that could fit both regional and international influence for the establishment of a new ground in order to achieve so. They proposed that we Brazilians should eat and digest foreign cultures. A parallel movement happened in architecture. In the late 20s, Lúcio Costa invited Le Corbusier for presenting a series of lectures in Brazil. He envisioned that Brazil should look towards the most new and the radical architectural experiments worldwide in order to translate it into Brazilian expression. The outcome was the development of a Brazilian modern architecture that produced masterpieces in the 50s and the 60s that still have influence today. Last paragraph.
Okay.
We are now almost a century ahead these early moments of modernism. Brazil has changed, the world has changed. Brazilian culture is rich and consistent. But mixing differences is still a very powerful way to produce knowledge. As a Brazilian and a Carioca, I see Studio X as a genuine platform that will provide multilateral benefits for both Brazil and the US. I'm sure that the US also will benefit from eating and digesting Brazilian culture as much as we do. Thank you.
Now we'll have two discussants. This is why I was being so mean. I must say I was just so charmed by this. I was becoming lax in my duties. I'm going to have to crack down now. Jason, did you want to speak from the table, or?
I'm fine at the table.
Okay.
If everybody else is okay with that.
Okay, good.
And Madam Chair, how much time do I have?
Well, now you only have 7 minutes.
Okay.
Don't say that, we're going to need it.
That's right. I want to be respectful of time, so we have an opportunity to discuss.
I also want to give Paulo time and then have a chance for discussion.
That's
yes.
right. Well, thank you very, very much for inviting me here today, and this has been an incredibly enriching experience. The limited amount of time I've been here. Unfortunately, when I was asked to participate, I'd already committed to be in Charlotte. So I flew in this morning, and I have to dash out this afternoon, so my apologies for my limited time here. But so far, very, very interesting presentations, and I thought the collaborations that were just discussed are really wonderful models of success that should be emulated in Brazil and potentially elsewhere in the world. My background in research in the past several years has been on the development of cross-border higher education, not specifically Latin America, but broadly the global phenomenon of education moving across international boundaries. And what I wanted to take the opportunity to do today is think about more broadly the context in which collaboration is now occurring across the globe, and then at the end offer some language for how we might think about the relationships of the collaborations that are existing and maybe be able to make comparisons across these collaborations so that we might be able to identify how they've been successful, why they've been successful, and so we can extrapolate from there to maybe build these out to be more successful in Brazil and elsewhere. Broadly in the world, we've found that there are three macro-level forces right now that are motivating collaboration or propelling collaboration. I codify them into 3 C's. These are not mutually exclusive items. They're they're interrelated, but they are equally, I think, separate and important to be thinking about. The first and one we often talk about is capacity building. There's an interest in the world today of building capacity, both within our countries and within our institutions, and we want to be thinking about how do we build capacity by collaborations and partnerships that are occurring between our institutions. The second one is global competitiveness. This is something that's been propelled forward probably more so in the last 5 years. The Davos report that come out every year thinking about the global competitiveness of countries. Nation states are certainly thinking about how they are globally competitive. The BRIC nations in particular are thinking about this as their economies are becoming more and more important and more dominant in the world. And one of the ways in which they're positioning the global competitiveness is via relationships with higher education systems in the developed world. Higher education systems that have been very, very successful over the years. Nations have recognized that the competitive advantage of the developed world has been their higher education system. And they have now been seeking to increase their own competitive advantage by building up their own higher education system. And one of the ways in which they're doing that is through collaborations with the institutions in the developed world, so that the experience and the capacity of the institutions in the developed world spill over and help to build up the capacity in the developing world, or the global south, or whatever we want to call it. The final one I want to offer, the final C, so capacity building, competitive advantage. Oh, and on competitive advantage, I wanted to offer this too, as I heard the dean speak earlier about moving outside of New York City. As I heard you discuss this, it sounds to me part of this is a competitive advantage for Columbia. That New York City for architects is no longer in and of itself a competitive location to be. That the architecture school, in order to maintain its competitive advantage, has to be located in other aspects of the world, cities that are rapidly developing in their own right. And the final C is clout, that nations and institutions are seeking soft power. Soft power is a reputational issue. It is one that allows them to wield influence, to gain more resources, and to overall just improve their reputational value in the world. And so more and more higher education institutions have become soft power entities. They have great legitimacy in the world, and so countries, particularly those that are emerging, are interested in partnering with educational institutions with a great deal of soft power. Obviously, Harvard is one of them. Columbia is another. University of Illinois both have great soft power in this world because of their reputational position and prestige worldwide. And so we see a lot of interest in developing relationships with highly renowned institutions. This has led to a lot of partnerships around the world, and I will challenge our chairwoman a little bit to say that I think there are some people who still think partnerships may be dangerous because of how they are formed. And in many ways, we've seen around the world is that these partnerships have been transactional in nature. They've been set up to be an exchange of goods and services, primarily benefiting the more powerful partner or collaborator in that relationship. And there's a lot of interest in this topic for higher education specialists and I think international politics in terms of how the historically developed world is partnering with the developing or emerging world, and ensuring that that relationship is not one-sided, making sure that it's not merely a transactional partnership, but a transformative one. And I want to offer some language to think about how do we move from the transactional to the transformative. And there are 3 domains when we think about collaborative relationships in higher education. The first is technical. Simply, how is it done? What is the nature of it? How do we accomplish it? What are the contractual obligations? That's more on the transactional side. What is the relational aspect of it? How do the people interact? And how is it developed in a sustainable way? Is it sustainable long term? Is it merely going to end at the end of when the funding dries out? Or is there more of a long-term capacity building so that we have a sustainable relationship? And the third is cultural. What are the cultural dynamics associated with the partnership with the collaboration? The cultural is the most important because that's where we begin to learn about each other, that's where we begin to learn about our organizations, and that's where we begin to see the transformative aspects actually occur, is in that cultural stage when we think about how do we blend our cultures together or learn from the different cultures. And I want to pick up, just to conclude here, and I want to make sure we have time to talk, The other, Jason, you posed two questions which I thought were very, very good, and you close your comments by saying, how is this good for Harvard, and how is this good for Brazil? And I want to push it a little bit further, and I think the questions we should be asking is, how is this transformative for Harvard, and how is it transformative for Brazil? Because I think that is what is actually happening with these collaborations. As I heard each of you talk today, there really sounded like a transformative effect was occurring at both institutions or both locations, and that we're really trying to transform the world or the educational organization. And so, again, I think we need to be asking ourselves, how is this transforming the partnering institutions or the partnering countries? And I will leave it at that.
Perfect.
Obrigado. Obrigado? Obrigado.
I now want to, Paulo, I sort of introduced you before you came in, but I want to introduce you a little bit differently now. In the spirit of collaboration, talk about collaboration. I want to introduce you sort of as D'Artagnan. The Lemann family has made another donation to endow a center at Stanford to bring Brazilians to study at the education school at Stanford. And so we welcome you as a collaborator in that respect, as well as, since this is the centerpiece of this symposium, is to talk about collaborations in international education. So thank you for being with us. I know it was hard for you to get here today. Thank you. And now I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. So I just want to first talk like 2 minutes about our new center, and then move on to my comments. So this center at Stanford is focused exclusively on is this work?
You have to talk right into it.
Hello? Okay. So it's a center that's exclusively focused on education, and it's a 10-year center, a 10-year effort, and Professor Martin Carnoy, who's here, is the co-PI together with me in this center. And so it's a center that's based on policy and innovation in education. And the idea is to train a new generation of educational reformers, educational researchers in Brazil. We have a divide right now where we have a lot of economists studying education in Brazil and a lot of the old guard educators studying education in Brazil, but they don't talk because they don't share a common language. So the economists, they look at the numbers, the educators look at the students and the schools, but they can't really talk and come to an agreement of what to do in education. So we want to train those kind of super researchers which would have quantitative skills to understand large-scale issues, but also knowledge in cognitive science, in learning sciences, to understand what happens at the micro level. So the idea is to contribute to systematic improvement in Brazilian education through evidence-based policy and innovation. And I think since we are in the Silicon Valley, we want to bring a lot of that kind of spirit to Brazilian education, of innovation, of technology, of innovation through breakthroughs in technology. But not only that, but take that to scale using the expertise that we have at Stanford. So we have David Planck, who is a policy specialist and actually lived in Brazil for 15 years and wrote one of the best known books on this history of Brazilian education. Eric Bettinger, who is an MIT trained economist who do measurement. Martin Carnoy, who is here, who is especially in international comparative education, and myself, who especially in technologies and innovation in education. And so just to finish that little introduction to our center, we are recruiting in Brazil across different fields, so we don't want just educators coming to our center. We want engineers, we want economists, we want doctors, we want people from all over the place. And we can do a lot of this because the School of Education at Stanford has a tradition in working together with the Graduate School of Business, with the Engineering School, with Social Sciences. And it's very easy at Stanford to take courses across different departments and to collaborate with other departments. It's a very interdisciplinary place. And so in this center, it's a 10-year effort, as I said. We're going to train about one PhD every year, 3 masters every year, visiting researchers, and other initiatives in research as well. And so let me just move on to commenting some of these presentations that we have. So I think what we're seeing in the last 10 years is a transition from the playground model to the collaborative model. And let me explain the playground model. 10 years ago, I was a graduate student at MIT, and I saw the inauguration or the start of this new initiative at MIT called Digital Nations, which was a consortium of different countries that would give money to MIT, particularly to MIT Media Lab, for MIT to go there and fix their problems. And it was a kind of a Peace Corps of academia. You give lots of money to American universities, and then American universities, as they know everything, they would just go and fix things because it's just a matter of calling the expert. So this consortium, it's probably, as you've guessed already, it failed within 2 or 3 years. And other initiatives of this kind failed too at MIT when I was there. There was a Media Lab, MIT Media Lab Asia, which opened in India, and MIT Media Lab Europe, which worked from Ireland. And they use this kind of playground model, and also what we call in Portuguese the ponte aérea model, which is let's just keep flying professors for like a week or two to these countries. And that model didn't work because that's not how our institutions work anyways. We don't just go there every 2 weeks and teach a class. We're there every day, and there's culture building. There are lots of things that require another kind of model. So I think the model became much more a collaboration between equals than this playground model where you send your students for a little tour in a developing country and for them to feel good about themselves because they're helping the poor and all of that. And I think I watched this transition as people were starting to travel to developing countries. They realized that, oh wow, they actually have very good universities over there. And even when I was trained as an engineer from the engineering school of University of São Paulo that we saw there in the presentation, and people were really surprised that say, oh, physics, calculus. I thought you only had like jungles in Brazil. It is actually a true story. People, they assumed that, we 10 years ago, before all this surge in the BRIC countries and all of that those countries had no higher education. It was a kind of a joke, and that wasn't true at all. And I think we've come a long way since then, and now there is much more of recognition that the level is not that different. That a lot of professors from University of São Paulo and professors from Harvard, they can talk along the same lines. I want to just finish talking about one particular aspect of these collaborations that has to do with my area, which is technology, which is the open source and open access. So also for the last 10 years, there was a huge surge in open access and open source in software and hardware, in intellectual property. And we as academics, we have the luxury of ignoring the logic of economics. So we say, we don't care if everything is free, we just do it because that's what we believe in. And the editors, all these big publishing companies, they said, that's nonsense, how are we going to pay for the paper and the printing and all of that? And we ignored all of that, and then it was in the beginning a hippie kind of thing, let's just give it away for free. And then it became a real a business model, it's the business model of open source. And there are many studies at Stanford now going on, studying the impact of open source, open access to academic articles in the development of scholarship in developing countries. And every year, for example, I come to New York for an event called the Open Hardware Summit, where people get a $1,000 robotics kit, for example, and make it for $20, or they get a $100,000 DNA sequencing machine, and in their garage, they make it for $3,000, and they put it online for free for everyone to download and use. And not only that, but now we have companies that are being formed where you can upload your design to this website, for example, for your DNA sequencing machine or your robotics kit. And then those companies, they have this instead of mass production, they have this individualized production. They have 3D printers that can make one at a time. So you can upload your design, and then someone in India can buy your device that's 3D print individually of your, for example, water filtration system, your energy saving device. And so the impact of this, what we do in academia, can be much larger because we can bypass a lot of the intermediate steps that we had before. So we can invent something in academia and see that invention immediately, in a matter of months, actually being available for people to purchase, to buy through these new channels. And I think that's a really fascinating phenomenon that we're seeing right now, and especially in the technology field. And there are like a number of examples of devices that are now being used for water purification, for energy saving, for safe cooking, for education, that began in academia and were in a matter of months made available to huge populations in the developing countries. So I think that's another important aspect of these collaborations, is that not only we can make a difference in academia, but we can now make a difference in the real world in a really much more significant way. Thank you.
Thank you. How much time? Okay. I've been told we've got a few minutes for discussion. I want to thank everybody who presented in this panel, and I guess I want to make an observation first, and then if you do want to talk, either put up your card or raise your hand in the back. Here's my observation. My observation is that everybody in this panel is justifiably proud of the collaborations, some longer standing than others, but of exciting new and very important old collaborations. I want to sort of rephrase Jason's 3 C's, and I want to put something out as 3 S's. My 3 S's are source, sustainable, and scalable. And we've seen diverse sources, but in each case we've seen a basis for sustainable collaboration. Some have gone on for 40 years, others are more recent, but they're sustainable. And as impressive as these presentations have been, I sense some disappointment from our Brazilian colleagues here who have traveled very far, who are envisioning nobly going to the moon, as Glauco Arabics has been saying, and they are hearing about the 3 and the 4 students who are being trained per year. 90 PhDs in economics who've made such a major impact in Brazil have taken decades to form. And I think that the real challenge, I don't expect anybody on this panel to give the answer in the next minute and a half, but I think it's a very important challenge for everybody in this room to think about as we leave here and continue our collaboration about how we are going to scale up these collaborations in a way that will benefit us all, and in the process help Brazil reach the moon in the next 5 years. With that, I will entertain questions I'll collect questions for about 3 minutes and then give our panelists a chance to answer. So please be brief.
One major structural problem that's been most vexing to you over time, what would that be? Again, in 2 sentences each.
Jason?
You just raise your tent here, everybody else wants to speak.
Do it in 2 words. Faculty time.
What was the question?
Yes, please.
A quick one. Is Frances Hagopian still in Canada? Still in Harvard? Because she's been to Brazil.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I found out last month I became the conselheira dos Tucanos. I didn't know that, but go ahead.
Okay. And the other thing is, there is a lot on the news from specialized centers on Brazil and U.S.-Brazil relations. So just to give an example, the Council on Foreign Relations released a huge report on U.S.-Brazil relations suggesting some measures for the U.S. government. The Foreign Policy magazine released today another interesting article suggesting some approaches between U.S. and Brazil. So my question is, how could you, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 universities get maybe closer to these other centers. I mean, and I ask specifically about Foreign Policy Magazine and Council of Foreign Relations, because my field is international relations. So how could you get closer to those centers and move on to, as you mentioned, get Brazil closer to the moon?
Other issues, other questions?
I guess.
Go ahead, Tom.
100,000 is the number that comes to mind, Fran, just to back up the point you were making.
Right. 75 plus 25,
Yeah,
right.
yeah, 75,000 PhDs or master's degrees or
Publicly funded,
publicly
plus
funded,
the hope
plus-
for another 25,000 from private funding.
And we're hearing 1, 2, 3s.
Right, and this is what our Brazilian colleagues
so
are. This is why their hearts are sinking, as we're so
well,
proud of our collaborations.
I wonder if they really are. So I wonder if I wanted to challenge maybe one
Okay.
or two or of them before. Some of them are going to unfortunately have to leave a little bit earlier. But maybe if not right now within earshot, but any reactions that they have to these kinds of collaborations that we've heard of from the 4 schools. And by the way, I'd like to welcome Stanford University very much to the not only in the form of Paulo Blickstein, but Martin Carno, who should by all rights be up here as well, for the effort they made to be here and what they represent in terms of extending our partnership. But basically, to hear from the Brazilians, maybe we'll have a chance later, but I'd like to hear from them on that.
Well, among the BRICS, I think Brazil and Russia probably have the highest percentage of PhDs teaching in universities. And if you just look at the public universities, Brazil has the highest percentage of PhDs. So I don't think it's a lack of PhDs that's the issue in Brazil. I think that the nature of the collaboration is, first of all, as Paulo said, we're trying to train, I think on the training side, there's already in Brazil a large number of very talented people doing research. But there are some issues in education because the people that are doing the good sort of quantitative research, for example, are not generally in schools of education. They're in departments of economics. And as an economist, I feel free to say that 95% of economists don't know anything about education except that they were in school. Their distance from the actual education system is enormous. And so one of the things that we, in our small way, would like to try to do in our collaboration is to try to build some bridges in Brazil, as we have done at Stanford, between people working in education who are social scientists or not social scientists and the social science community to actually improve the policy research in general. So I mean, it's not, that in itself is not a small task. Maybe it won't get us to the moon, but if we can, I don't think we can take, I think Brazil is way down the road in terms of higher education, training, very capable people to teach, et cetera. But if we can improve the kind of changes that are made and the policy making in general, again, there has been progress. So I mean, we're not coming in at the beginning of anything.
Right, and I would agree. I would say that designing cities of the future and cleaning the water supply for São Paulo and solving the problem of infectious diseases and training PhDs that then go on and train other PhDs in Brazil are not small accomplishments, and they lay the foundation for these. This is why these kinds of collaborations are so valuable that all of our institutions are doing. I was only commenting that I was just sensing, perhaps I was mistaken, but apparently not. I was just sensing real urgency.
Yeah,
it's
a fair comment, but I think we'll have to make our case to Brazil that we're doing an effective job and not being the media lab at MIT in the previous time.
I think think the main point is there are a lot of good initiatives, but many of them, to my understanding, seem too much independent from one from the other. And actually, there should be a both-way relationship. For example, in terms of energy, Brazil is much more advanced than the United States, and I studied the subject. In terms of biotech, biofuels, Brazil is advanced, and the U.S. should benefit from that. So in a lot of different fields, there are a lot of things to aggregate from one side to the other in both ways. And I see a lot of different initiatives, but my whole point is how to get all those together in a way to all these together to get to a better place.
Thank you very much. I got one more comment. Werner.
I'd like to make a provocation. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, the provocations are following. I think the great thing that Jorge Paulo has done in our 3 institutions, he's given us an endowment.
4 institutions now.
4 institutions. He's given an endowment which will last forever, supposedly. That gives us a chance to do the sort of things that the other another institution hasn't been able to do. Not one, many institutions. I'm talking about the foundations. Maybe Joan Dassin, that's aimed at you, and you can. It seems to me. I mean, many years ago, I did some consulting work for the Ford Foundation. But the interesting thing, the Ford Foundation, is they give grants on a short-term basis. We'll give a 3-year grant, then we want to know whether you can follow through, and we can. In other words, we are not going to support you forever. They wanted to be social innovators. They don't want to give a grant that might last 10 or 20 years. No, in 3 years, and what we had to do is scramble around, try to justify, yes, in 3 years they'll find even more funding somewhere else. And it seems to me that, and the only sin is, it's not just the Ford Foundation, but most of the foundation is, it's a group of people who want to be social innovators, therefore they always want to do something new, therefore they will not give permanent or long-term funding for anyone. So it seems to me we're very lucky that Jorge Paulo has done this, and will there be a way in which we could persuade other sources of funding to give us more permanent, both in the United States and in Brazil, if the rich in Brazil can change their mentality about giving, about philanthropy, and Jorge Paulo is very unique in this. But basically, that's what I wanted to comment on.
You weren't criticizing me, too, because I used to be at the Ford Foundation.
But you left it. For good reason.
And I worked together, in fact, there. But thank you very, very much. There's quite a bit of hidden agenda, I guess, a little bit in this session, which was a wonderful session. Thank you very much for Anne, who's quietly retreated before we could even thank her properly. We will in a moment. But it was because each of our 3 or 4 universities is experimenting with what to do. And we come out of our reality and what we're dealing with and how we think in our cultures and what we think is needed and how we are engaging with Brazil. And I think we need to think about that. I think we're planting seeds that are going to bear fruit over a long period of time. But I guess we've challenged, I tried to echo the challenge to our Brazilian colleagues that what is it they would have us do? In Brazil.
I'm sorry.
Maybe Mark can comment on that.
I have to run, but I'm really, really sorry to leave because it's such an interesting question. I think just at the intellectual level, you could consider the possibility that, for example, the United States has really nothing to offer Brazil, that Brazil has nothing to offer the United States. And this would not be a negative scenario because it's quite possible, for example, that the American research unit research university is internally dysfunctional in the sense that the different parts of the university don't talk to each other.
Right.
It's getting to this open source question. And it's also possible that much of the discourse in Brazil is dysfunctional because everybody is locked in their various positions. And one of the advantages of these kinds of transactions is that they, in a way, oblige the discourse on both sides to change. So I don't think it's necessarily about an exchange of material or of ideas or resources, but it changes the ecology. So to give you my example, in architecture schools everywhere in the world do not talk to each other. They are often the people who are teaching in one school were trained in the other school, but the schools don't talk. What we have found, it's extremely easy for us as a sort of outsider, as a sort of almost irresponsible outsider, it's very easy for us to stimulate dialogue between schools that never talk to each other. And that dialogue is more profound and more enriching than anything we could offer them. But in reverse, for us to be in Brazil forces us inside the school to speak differently. I do think we have many good, important lessons to teach each other, but even if we did not, somehow the presence of the stranger and even a constant question, is this valuable or not, that the fact that it's never for sure a good idea, forces the debate to change. And I think this is a scalable phenomenon because it relates directly to the open source situation. I think if we live in an age in which it's not what you have but what you share that defines your value, then it's really not so much about how many economists, but in which way is the definition of economist changing on both sides. And in this sense, I think it's very, very interesting the point you were making about the long-term support, because that seems to me a much more ecological approach and enables a kind of transgenerational change in the discourse, rather than a short-term project in which there's always a deliverable. Just to finish, I hate reports, because when reports are commissioned, you already know the result. So all of the endless beautiful projects that are supported by foundations for 3 years, it was already clear what they would produce, and that's why they get the money. So I think the problem is not even that it's only for 3 years, it's that you don't need to do the research, you already know the result. And this kind of institutional support you have actually allows you to work on questions that the significance of the question is not even clear. And I think these are the human questions that really matter to me. But anyway, I'm sorry I have to leave.
I don't think I could figure a better way to end it than that. But I want to thank Fran and the many, many people who have contributed to this, whose names are listed. Fran, thank you very, very much. And,